you, including myself, but here we are. We have a packed agenda today, hence the reason for the early start. I'll go through it as quickly as I possibly can. It's the usual items of housekeeping to attend to before we transact the daily business. Please address the microphone when speaking to the committee and switch off the microphone after use. Please ensure all mobile phones are switched off or put onto silent mode. We're not expecting fire alarm testing today, so should the alarm sound, it's probably genuine. So please vacate as quickly as possible following the emergency procedures of the council house. We are in the Warspite room, so we are on candid camera. So the usual warning applies. The meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of subsequent repeat viewing. By entering the Warspite room and during the course of the meeting, councillors are consenting to being filmed and the use of those recordings for webcasting. Without further ado, we move to item number 1 on the agenda, and that is to receive apologies.
Through you, Chair, we've received apologies from Councillor Toffen, and we've have Councillor Stevens in the place of Councillor Evans today. Oh, we've also received apologies from Annette Benny, our independent member.
Is Mrs. Benny online or not at all today? Okay, thank you very much indeed. Move to item number 2 on the agenda, declarations of interest. Does anybody have aught to declare? No? Excellent. Item number 3 on the agenda is the minutes of the previous meeting, which have been circulated in the pack, so you've all got a copy. But before I sort of make sure the minutes are approved, are there any matters arising from the minutes, Vice Chair?
No, Chair, thank you.
So all those members present at the time deem a true and accurate reflection, which I think is just we too. Okay, thank you. Moving on to item number 4 on the agenda, that's Chair's urgent business. I don't have any points to raise under this heading. So we will go on to item number 5, which is the external audit progress report and sector update, which I believe we have Mr. Dossett online, ready to tune in.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Can, yes.
Yep. Thank you. So this is our progress report and sector update. Probably the main thing to draw to your attention is the section on page 16. 16 of the pack, which is on the financial statements 1920. And I'm sure the council's section 151 officer would also like to comment on this matter. So you'll recall that the audit of the 1920 accounts was delayed by one historic issue, which was the pensions transaction, and one new issue, which was the infrastructure assets issue that impacted on all relevant local authorities. Now, the latter issue has been resolved from a governmental point of view with a statutory override and with some further guidance from SITFA. So that issue is effectively resolved as a barrier to audits being signed off. And so we're left with the pensions transaction. Myself and Section 151 officer have been in discussion correspondence over this matter in the last couple of months. And as we stand today, as we had a number of options and potential solutions to manage that issue, but as we stand today, we're in a bit of an impasse or a bit of a back to square one. So it's just to update members that we've had discussions with the council about what the options are in terms of progressing this. Council will need to go away and think about how that might take place. But obviously, it's quite a live issue. I thought it's important to bring that to the committee's attention. At the moment, we're not in a place to progress that issue. So I don't know whether David would like to comment at this stage or later, but that's probably the most important issue in this progress report.
Through you, Chair. If I just pick up, thank you, Paul. Absolutely right. We've been having conversations now for many months, but certainly in the last couple of weeks, we've put our heads together again. I thought we maybe had a a route through that we could all agree to, but that hasn't quite worked at the moment. So my next course of action will be to put the options paper back in front of the corporate management team in the first instance, setting out what the options are and what the implications might be from an accounting point of view and so on, and still hoping to conclude this sooner rather than later. So if you could bear with me for a little bit longer, I know it's been going on for a while, but we are keep trying.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, certainly this is a great cause for concern, and it has wider ramifications across the council. I'm sure members will agree that. So we look forward to getting some progress on that. Okay, Mr. Dossett, would you like to continue your report? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Next section just reflects that we've made good progress on our work on the 2021 financial statements, and that is progressing as we speak. So that's a positive, and we're looking to complete that and bring that back to the committee meeting in November. Obviously, all these things linked together in terms of closing out on 1920, and then looking to progress 21-22 as well. So there's a clear ambition on our part and the council's part to try and catch all these old years up. And one of the bigger issues in the sector at the moment is how you deal with these old years that are not signed. There was a public accounts committee meeting last week where the committee considered the challenges of many audits outstanding across the sector for all sorts of reasons, and the risks that pose to governance in local government. And they are urging all the stakeholders, that's auditors, local authorities, DLUC, regulators, a whole range of people to work together to try and get to a place where we can accelerate that timetable, because we have a new PSAA contract which begins in 11 days' time, and there's some issues about how does that contract get progressed as well. So it's a really important issue. We'll obviously do our part as a firm to try and progress that issue, and obviously working with the council directly to try and bring this long running issue over the pensions transaction to a close. So, Chair, that's all I wanted to say on this report. Obviously, happy to take any questions that members have.
Thank you very much indeed, Grant Thornton. Questions, observations, or comments, please? Councillor Stephen.
Thanks, Chair. It was touched on briefly, but just in terms of the wider implications for the council, I think for the openness, it might just be worth reminding ourselves what those implications actually are and what we're doing sort of day to day, if we can, to mitigate those before we reach a natural conclusion. Would I think be helpful?
Yes, sentiments I share. Anybody? Vice Chair? Right. I believe then we note the report. Great.
Sorry, that was my question. Could we have a brief overview of what the implications are? Just
Sorry,
so
I thought it was a statement.
Just so we can remind ourselves, yeah.
Sorry, Sharon, Paul wanted to come in first. Then
Sorry.
Yeah. So what
Sorry,
are the
Chair,
implications of not getting the account signed off now in an orderly fashion?
Shall I? So if I give an overview, and David may be able to comment on more specifics. So, in terms of late accounts and outstanding years, there are no implications in terms of governmental action per se, but clearly, with the focus of the Public Accounts Committee and indeed the department's own scrutiny committee in Parliament, there's an increasing focus on these late audits. So there'll be more detailed scrutiny on individual audits that are behind, and that's scrutiny for all players concerned. So I think that's the big picture things in terms of what would happen. The very important aspect of this, of course, is the whole purpose of statutory audit is to identify issues, control weaknesses, whatever else it is as part of that statutory audit process. And then whilst we are in a good place in terms of the broader value for money responsibilities, because we're quite up to date with our work in that area, obviously there are issues and transactions that may emerge from the audit of a set of accounts that the auditor ought to be bringing to the attention of those charged with governance, and clearly we've not been doing that because we're still in this position of 1920 not being signed. I mean, 2021, at least we're in a position where we will report this year on our findings, so that catches that up a bit. But you'll see that we're still behind, and that is a risk for any authority that's in that particular place.
Thank you. Does anybody know how many authorities are in the same position?
Yes. So as of the 31st of December, there were 600 audit opinions outstanding for 21, 22 and earlier. If you filter that figure has probably now gone down to about 500 or so. But if you filter that out, there's still approximately 50 authorities who are at 2021 and earlier unsigned accounts. So it's quite a significant number.
Any further questions on this point?
Can I just
Yes,
come in, just picking up on Councillor Stevens' point about what are the implications. So Paul Dossett's absolutely correct. There's no sort of legal requirement, but obviously the longer this goes on, the more difficult it becomes for finance in particular, and the pressures on the staff to actually close the books. Because even if I were in a position today to say, Paul and I have reached agreement, he's about to sign off 1920, 2021 is underway, but that then needs to get signed off. We were talking about putting a schedule together that saw that we might be able to catch up with the by December 24 or with the 23-24 accounts. But what that actually means in practice is a rolling audit for the finance team and for Grant Thornton. So as soon as you put one to bed, you move into the next one. So there's that issue to be contended with. But more importantly, that I think, depending on what the outcome is of the 1920 accounts, there will be some implications that will ripple through, and I'll have to readjust the accounts for the following years. And depending on what the outcome is what the impact that might be, and what it does to the accounts themselves. So there's a number of reasons why I want to get this one closed down sooner rather than later.
That's helpful, thanks, Chair.
Thank you. And of course, we want to avoid the knock-on effect, which is a valid point. So if there's no further questions or comments on this particular item, I believe that on item number 6 of the agenda, Mr. Dossett, you are doing a verbal update on the housing benefits, please.
Thank you. Justine, are you going to carry that forward?
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. In terms of the housing benefits claims, so the work should have been signed off in January. There's an extension to the deadline for the 21-22 claim, and that work is going to be completed hopefully for the end of April. And your 2021 claim was signed off at the end of April last year. So we are relatively up to date, and it's not uncommon for a DWP to be granting extensions to local authorities at this time.
Thank you. Any questions on the housing benefits? In which case, I believe the committee notes the report with grateful thanks to both of you. moving on to item number 7 on the agenda, we have the External Auditor's Update Annual Report 2021 and 21-22, which I believe again is you, Mr. Dossett.
I'll take that, Chair. You saw the report and discussed it at the November Audit Committee, but you did ask for more detailed recommendations from not recommendations, sorry, more detailed management responses to the recommendations. So management have provided us with those. We've included them throughout the report and added an extra action plan. So they're all together with the March 23 recommendations. So happy to take any questions on those.
To the floor. Any questions, comments, observations? Thank you very much for your report, which is also. Oh, sorry. Mr.
Sorry,
Murphy.
just through you, Chair. Just for the committee to note that for completeness, I pulled out the 14 recommendations from the November report, and we talk about it further down the agenda if anybody wants to go into more detail.
Yes, I see there's a 14-point action plan later on. Thank you. In fact, yes, as Vice Chair has astutely pointed out, it is the next item on the agenda. So we have the item number 8 of the agenda, which is the Audit Actions Review, which you will find on pages 23 to 30 of your pack. Mr. Luby is here somewhere, I believe, who's going to introduce that.
Thank you, Chair. Unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, I shouldn't have said that. I can hear Paul and Justine really well, really clear audio for me on the virtual committee, but I'm really struggling to hear committee members. So hopefully you can hear me clearly. And the audit actions review is the regular review that comes to committee for noting. Just one up, I suppose, from the practical side, I've actually presented this report. I did discuss with the chair that we would only now present this report 6 monthly. I think a combination of reasons, really, partly because of the time it takes really for audit actions to be implemented, but also there is a resource commitment that's been placed upon Devon Audit Partnership, and through discussions with Devon Audit Partnership, we thought it'd be more appropriate to have this report come twice a year rather than every quarter. So as usual, it's quite a brief report, as you can see. I suppose the main area of interest is to look at the pie chart, which gives an indication of where we are in terms of the number of internal audit recommendations that have been moved forward. If you look at that pie chart, you can see that 43% of audit recommendations are still outstanding, but that compares to 47 last time we presented this report, and fully implemented 33%, which is down from 40% last time, but partially implemented has gone up to 24% from 13% last time. Appreciate there's a lot of statistics there, and it doesn't really tell you about the detail of individual internal audit recommendations, but I think in essence it's a sort of a continual thing whereby, depending on when the report has been approved and when services have had a chance to start implementing the recommendations, some of them do take longer than others. I suspect this is the sort of figures we'll continue to see going forward. On table 1, though, it does give you an indication of individual reports where there are significant numbers of recommendations and the journey of services to actually implement them, and they're set out in table 1, and then table 2 obviously just provides you a bit of a summary position on those recommendations that are still outstanding. So I wasn't going to say much more, Chair. Happy to take any questions. I just hope I can hear them.
Thank you. Can you hear me better now? Because the batteries have been changed on this microphone.
Okay, Chair, I can hear you best actually of everyone. You're the only one I can really hear.
Excellent. I have a couple of observations. I mean, clearly, when we look at the pie chart, it's commendable that the number fully concluded, fully implemented figure has gone up. So we're now getting to a higher level, but certainly 43% of outstanding is tremendously high. The other observation I have as well, this was more a question than an observation. If you look at table 1, it seems to be a high number of special guardianship orders. Is that the nature of the business, or is there anything which we need to identify as an area of concern?
If I,
In terms of
sorry,
the actual, sorry, was someone else speaking there?
sorry, Paul, I didn't know if Chair wanted me to come in and.
So, sorry, happy for you to come in. Happy for you to come in, Brenda, if you want to provide a bit more detail on that specific audit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please.
It's a very, very complex area. We are monitoring. There were 29 recommendations. Now, some of those recommendations were incredibly detailed, but it was a specific piece of work that the service area wanted us to really drill down and pull out every bit of detail, not just sort of the high overarching risk. Also in special guardianships, there's a range of, it's so complex, a range of service areas involved. They are working through it, but there's also been management changes at the strategic levels within children's services. So now as they're recruiting we've got a new strategic director, new service directors, and recruiting on down through the organisation, we would expect to see more change. But our thoughts are to have a more detailed look this year at what they're doing. So actually do a more light touch piece of work rather than just going back and saying, so what have you done? We'll drill down a little bit more. And to consider whether or not the recommendations that were made at a point in time remain relevant, because service areas move on, things change. So we need to, I think, revisit this one in full with the service area.
Thank you for that explanation. Any questions, further observations? Vice Chair. In which case then, I would like to formally note that report. Grateful thanks. Moving on to item number 9 of the agenda, we have the informing the audit risk assessment, which is on pages 31 to 66, which I believe is our, it is Carolyn. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report really is to contribute towards an effective two-way communication between the Council's external auditors and Plymouth City Council's Audit and Governance Committee as those charged with governance. The report, if you've had a chance to look through it, covers some important areas of the auditor risk assessment where the auditors are required to make inquiries of the Audit and Governance Committee under auditing standards. And it covers a number of areas like fraud, risk assessment, our related parties, and our accounting estimates. And it's management response to questions from the auditors. So it's really just, I've been through this with David and senior finance management and also with legal to formulate the response. And really it's for members to note the contents of the report. And the main reason is under international accounting standards, auditors have specific responsibilities to communicate to the Audit and Governance Committee, and these are our responses. Thank you, Chair.
I must admit, I do like the way the format is in terms of question and answer, which makes the report readable and easy to access for my tiny brain.
I can't take credit for that. We're really completing the form that what we're sent from Grant Thornton, but it took quite a lot of time to formulate the responses in a way that we hope that the auditors would want to see. So,
any questions on this item of the agenda, please?
Just briefly, Chair. As always, there's an awful lot of information for us to read in the Audit and Governance Committee, which we do our very best to. And I kind of also want some reassurance that there's nothing here for members to be overly concerned about in respect of the feedback in the questions that have been asked and our response. So I'm not sure there is a mechanism to do that in the report itself, but just perhaps can you point out if there are areas that this committee should, in fact, look to continue to scrutinise going forward, please?
I think generally one of the big areas that's been picked up on with external audit recently is to do with estimation uncertainty, and the part of this problem comes to the time we have to actually produce a statement of accounts document, because the deadline this year is 31st of May, which it might sound a long time, but when you look at a 110-page document with all of the associated working papers, it takes quite a long time to work through that information. And previously, we've probably relied more heavily on estimates, but by relying on estimates, we're more prey to challenge from external audit, because we're looking 2 years back. This audit risk assessment document is for what happened 2 years ago. So obviously we know a lot more now than we did 2 years ago, and we're being audited at a higher standard than we were 2 years ago because of things like the Practice Note 10, which auditors work to, and the requirements for the Financial Reporting Council. So I'm not sure I can give complete assurance based on that, but all I can say is that we're trying to build in more resilience and more less reliance on uncertainty as we move forwards. But it's not easy with the timescales that we have, because we have 6 weeks to produce a document, whereas the auditors could potentially have a year or longer, because there isn't a statutory deadline for them like there is for us to produce the document. So I'm not sure if that helps to reassure you, but I'm trying to be realistic.
So yes, it's a snapshot in time, and clearly you do what you best can within the time frame, which. Yes.
Sorry, I'm nodding furiously just to add. I think we need to take this into context. This is one tool that's in the toolbox, to use the phrase. So I wouldn't take this as this is the gospel that we adhere to. So you've got the annual governance statement, you've got the internal audit reports coming here, you've got external audit reports, you've got my report coming through this time as well. So I think when you look at it in the whole, hopefully that will be enough to give the committee the assurance that it's looking for. And if anything were to come up that I thought that's needs reporting through, such as where we are with the meow transaction, for instance, I would bring that to the committee's attention. So hopefully that will give some extra reassurance.
Gives us all reassurance. Thank you very much for that. So looking at this, we note the report and we've considered it in length. We will therefore go on to the gritty 14-point action plan, which is item number 10 of the agenda. Which, do we have a presenter? Is that going to be you, sir?
Back to me, Chair, if that's okay. So as we found out in the November report, when quite rightly Grant Thornton put forward their recommendations to us, Plymouth City Council, and more importantly to the committee, and I've updated those through the report. I just thought, for a completeness point of view, it would be useful to have this as a standalone document that we might be able to refer back to. So I'm not proposing, particularly, Chair, to go through each and every one of those 14 recommendations, but I'm quite happy to pick up any questions or comments that people might have. I think the one that I ought to just possibly point out is around the recently introduced CIPFA accounting standards. And I've said in here that I have done a Section 151 officer's view of the world as a desktop exercise. I think that, again, talking about the tools that we've got in the box, that's another useful way of looking at the resilience of finances. But the conclusion from that is there's still some work to do, and I'll pick that up and come back to a future committee. But other than that, Chair, I'll just open it up to any comments or questions.
Thank you. Yes, I note, of course, the various changes with regard to reserves on item number 7 there. And yeah, so we have further clarifications required. Is that correct?
Sorry, Chair, could you just repeat that? I beg your
Yes,
pardon.
sorry, item number 7 with the reserves. It says at the bottom, we have asked for clarification on what level will be sufficient. Could you shed any light on that, please?
So I kept that wording in because that's the wording that I put into the draft report, but I've since had conversations with Grant Thornton about what is and isn't counted as a usable reserve. So we're still sort of homing in on the working balance, as we call it, the 8.4, and that's why I'm responding saying that I've made a commitment to draft a new MTFP, which will clearly set out how we address that particular issue. But there are other balances that sort of come into play. So I can give you assurance again that there are balances there.
Thank you. Questions? Yes,
I've got a small little hobby horse, and it relates to recommendation number 1, and it's more into in fact the wording. And you'll forgive me as a member who goes to the difficulty and challenge of being elected and sitting as a democratically elected individual. And on numerous occasions, we of course listen very carefully to the advice given to us by officers, and that's great, and we often follow the recommendations, but it shouldn't be in every case. The whole point of having a democracy is to allow members to listen very carefully to the advice they're given and make their own decision, which is entirely appropriate. So I don't think it's entirely appropriate for members to simply to take the advice from the 151 officer without considering the wider implications to the general public. Right. But that's my own personal view, and it's just a matter of wording, but I'll put that on record.
any comments? Further comments? Yes.
Mark is Mark's quite right in terms of the wording. I think we all appreciate the thrust of what's being discussed, but I think later on we come on to the officers' code of conduct, and having that professional political split is absolutely vital to successful local government in Britain. And of course, officers need to advise a say on what's legal and what's good practice. They're the professionals. With respect to the three of us, we're not in that sense. But we're given recommendations, not instructions. And I think there might be, as someone I know often says, there might be a more elegant way of phrasing the recommendation in number 1 to reflect that without losing the thrust of what David and his colleagues are looking to put over.
Thank you. Open to suggestions. Any comments you would like to make on that point?
Sorry, through you again, Chair, just reiterate exactly what the councillors have said, and I think they will bear out and say that that's the way that we've approached certainly this year's budget. We've had lots of discussions, and I've written lots of words about this is my advice, but I absolutely agree. It's the same as myself. I take advice from HR, from legal. People take advice from finance. It's then my decision whether I follow that advice, isn't it? I'm glad to say that for 23-24, my advice was heeded, and we got the council tax increase that I was proposing or putting forward. So, but I absolutely see where you're coming from. It could be, it's in the wording, possibly.
Any other points, comments, observations? What we're going to do is take the next item of the agenda, which is item number 11, but just to let you know, we are having technical issues with the IT system, so I will be closing for a short break after that instead of after item number 12. So item number 11 of the agenda is the internal audit, annual audit plan 2023-2024, which you'll find at pages 97 to 110, which I believe Ms Davis is going to present. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Members, I think the report is fairly self-explanatory. It's very thematic this year. If I take you to page 102, there's a pie chart, and that actually reflects how the spread of the council's annual budget. And that's quite important because to provide assurance to members at the end of the year, we need to have a spread of audit work across the various service areas. Page 103 provides a thematic overview of the audit coverage. Now, what you'll see this year, unlike previous years, we used to have a plan that was laid out, defined line by line, in exactly what we're going to do. We have some specifics. We've got the key financial systems, because really important areas, very large sums of money, very material to the production of the council's annual accounts. We've got areas that we've defined around a cyber assessment framework, user account management, because obviously IT underpins everything that the council does. We've got grants of certification, including supporting families' payment by results pause project, and that is statutory requirements that we need to sign off those areas of expenditure for the council. But the remainder of it, we've given a flavour of some of the areas that we're thinking about covering, but this will be, we'll work up the actual programme of work as we go through the year. And we've started on that already with children's services. So we've had conversations, and actually we're looking at work that we're going to do in the coming year around special educational needs and disability, which is a very, very high spend area. That's been discussed by the service, the strategic director and a departmental management team, and now we're just working up a programme of work. So the way that the audit plan will work, as we develop it, as we undertake various areas of work and plan out more specifically as we go through the year, when we bring back to members our progress reports, it will be defined in the detail that you have always had. But what we're not, the difference this year is we're working on themes rather than saying we're going to do X, Y, and Z and then find it changes as we go through the year, because obviously we're all working in a rapidly changing environment, and internal audit, to provide you with a good service, we need to be responsive to the needs and the risks of the council. So I'm very happy, Chair, to take any questions if members have any.
Thank you. I mean, just a quick question on page 103. The Officer Director for Public Health to be determined. What's the reason for that gap, please?
That will be, we'll have a discussion with Ruth Harrell and her management team. It is a fairly small area in terms of expenditure when you compare it to children's and adult services finance. And we will actually sit down then and work out with the director's management team what areas, the area that we can best provide a service to them and the timing of when that service should be provided. But we have a tendency to have a pot of days usually for public health, and that is what we have done traditionally in that service area.
Thank you for your report. Any questions, please, for Brenda Davis?
Sure.
Yes, Vice Chair.
I agree with the approach you're taking, it for it to be organic and things to be added as and when necessary. And I see that you put in the governance arrangements for Plymouth and South Devon Freeport, which is very welcome. Just in respect of the council declaring a climate change emergency and how that might impact upon our work programme and subsequently your audit programme, do you think there's perhaps an opportunity to consider that moving forward, please?
Certainly, I'm very happy to take that forward and obviously discuss that with the director of the place and sort of others across the authority as to what areas we can get involved in. Yeah.
Any further questions on that point? Vice Chair. Councillor Stevens. Thank you very much indeed for that report. We reviewed and we approved the 2022-2023 internal audit plan. We therefore will now take 10 minutes, move on to the next item on the agenda. We'll move on to item number 12 on the agenda now, which is the whistle. Do beg your pardon, I said we need another 10 minutes. Okay, thank you. Yes, so we will conveniently break at that point, and for a 10-minute break, See you back. The changes due to the modern slavery laws, and we have our legal eagle, Emma Jackson. Could you kindly deliver your report? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I apologise. There was supposed to be a briefing paper with the papers, but it appears not to be included in the pack. So I'm just going to talk you through what would otherwise be in front of you in writing. So as you will recall, the policy was brought to committee for consideration on the 30th of September 2022 with a few proposed changes. At the meeting, members expressed concern regarding the amendments because they felt that it may lose the right for members to whistleblow. Committee therefore decided it would not approve the proposed amendments before it at that time and asked for it to come back with having had further consideration. So therefore the report's before you today with further amendments proposed that have been made subsequent to the last time it was presented to committee. In terms of the report, there is legislative background to it. That is the Public Interest Disclosures Act 1998, which introduced into the Employment Rights Act protection for those who, in a work setting, wanted to raise concerns about malpractice with their employers. And under the legislation, it gave them the rights to protection where they did that, including protection from unfair dismissal and protection from any other detriment arising from the whistleblowing. The Act then defines who a worker is and therefore who the whistleblowing principles enshrined in it apply to. Nationally, we've got guidance from the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, which gives examples of what a whistleblowing policy should commit, and that's been commit to, and that's been reviewed and taken into account when making the proposed amendments. We've also looked at the report from the Public Concern at Work charity, which is also known as Protect, who also produced a whistleblowing code of conduct, which sets out best practice for employers in developing their policies. There's no requirement in law for the council to have a policy, however, one is produced as a matter of good practice. And neither the policy or the law provide a right to whistleblow. The primary purpose of it is to ensure that where an employee whistleblows, they are in fact protected and they can make that disclosure free from consequences in terms of their employment. So before you today, I will just summarise what the proposed changes are. Essentially, it's to try and achieve some clarity in several areas. So at paragraph 1.2, it sets out that the protection within it specifically applies to employees only reflecting the law and the general ability of the council to act. At paragraph 1.3, there's specific reassurance added for employees in relation to the council's approach to whistleblowing. At paragraphs 2.1, 2.5 and 2.6, essentially this explains the difference between employees and how whistleblowing applies to them versus how it will apply to other people, including councillors. What we've sought to do here is make clear that others may use the whistleblowing process to raise concerns, but there are specific elements of it that will relate solely to employees. At paragraph 2.8, we then include a further explanation around the different policies that the council has and procedures and try to clarify where they might be more appropriately used in some cases. And then paragraphs 4.2 and paragraphs 5.1 have minor amendments with them, just to make sure that the process is not just worded with reference to employees. On that basis, it's now considered that the policy is clear as to who it applies to and in what circumstances, and therefore it's before committee for approval.
Thank you. So the sections themselves have been, the ones you've alluded to have been rewritten. So it would have been helpful if there were some track changes for the minor amendments and also perhaps different colours for the full amendment against the original. But does anyone else have any comments or observations to make? Yes, Councillor Stevens.
Thanks. I've got a couple of points, if I may, Chair. Firstly, in terms of the safeguards which Emma spoke about, are our recognised trade unions comfortable with? I presume they've been consulted on this because this is about protection for their members if they fall into a particular circumstance. So, are they satisfied that the protections are robust enough? Is my first question.
That's a very good question. presumably this gone through the scrutiny and there's been consultation with the various trade union representatives.
Yes, the policy's been through the trade unions on previous occasions. None of those areas have been touched. The substance remains the same. The amendments that have been made are solely to clarify where something relates to an employee versus where it relates to another individual in another capacity.
That's helpful. I'm grateful for that. My second point relates to the status of councillors, because clearly we're not employees. We don't have contracts of employment with the council, so our relationship is different from that of our staff. But as Emma said, that there is still the possibility for us to fall into the category of whistleblowers. What protection, if that's the right phrase, if any, exists for councillors in that regard? Clearly, we're not subject to management or dismissal as staff are. But let me give you an example, Chair. Let's say that you had concerns and you wanted to blow the whistle. What's to stop then? Clearly, that management can't have no control over you in that sense. But what's to stop your political leadership saying, well, you're going to whistleblow? You like chairing the Audit and Governance Committee, do you? You still want to carry... Which is, in essence, the protection that we're giving to staff. What, if anything, can we do in the political realm along those lines?
I'm very glad you came today, Councillor Stevens, because that's another very astute question. Presumably, Emma, that would be covered by the Councillors' Code of Conduct, or is there a whistleblowing element in that, or should we be looking at incorporating whistleblowing for members in this particular document before us?
Thank you, Chair. In relation to the example that's just been given, what I would say is in that circumstance, that would be an action of the political group and not of the council. So it would be relevant to look to what the political group had in terms of its whistleblowing policy. Obviously, in terms of the council, we wouldn't take any action against a member unless there was a standards complaint and that standards complaint was upheld. And even then, our scope in terms of outcomes is limited. So it's not quite the same, because obviously if it were to be that someone was threatened with being removed from a committee by its political group, that's a matter for the political group and not the council.
Supplementary?
Yeah, I mean, in all fairness, that's the answer that I expected, and there's not a great deal that Emma can say differently there. But I think it is something that we need to be, even if we take no action and don't incorporate anything in policy terms, it's something we just need to be alive to, if I can put it in those terms.
Could I also mention, you can't see it from the agenda, when we move further down, there's some comments I wish to make about constitutional review, and that perhaps we can discuss it later on in the meeting. Any further questions or comments about the policy we have in front of us? Thank you very much for presenting that report, and it is duly noted. Thank you. Moving on now to item number 13 on the agenda, we have the Treasury Management Practice Principles. Now, I believe some people haven't got it in their pack, but it is available on the online version, which should come in at page 57, agenda item number 13. And I believe you've got to make a few bullet points first before delivering the report. Thank you. We look forward to that.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to seek your approval to just highlight a response to a few publicised items in the press around the banking crisis, etc. So just to make the committee aware that the council receives regular guidance from its Treasury Management advisors, Arlene Close, and we take account of the guidance that they're given, and they provide us with timely highlights of any issues in the money in the banking or financial markets. Today we've had an update, and this is sort of really just a follow on from that, that Plymouth City Council have no financial transactions with either the Silicon Valley Bank or Credit Suisse. However, through the guidance from our Treasury advisors, we're advised due to the ongoing uncertainty with the banking market, to hold a maximum of 35 days duration of any unsecured bank deposits as a cautious temporary measure. Predominantly, the council are just holding monies within money market funds or the Barclays call account, so we're protected. We're aligning our practice with the guidance we've received. So that was that, just to note that element. And now I'll go on to the main report, the Treasury Management Practices and Principles and Schedules for 23-24. This is your agenda item 13, and it's pages 57 to 120. The SIPFA Code of Practice on Treasury Management requires the Council to publish its practices and principles and schedules each year. The Treasury Management Practices, Principles and Schedules are in place to ensure that Council's Treasury Management Policy is adhered to and that working practices and controls are in place to meet the approved strategy. The report sets out 13 key Treasury Management Practices, or TMPs, and it reflects the updates to the Treasury Management Code, which was last reviewed in December 2021. The Treasury Management sets out the policies, objectives and approach to risk management of all its Treasury Management activities, and the report sets out the manner and how the authority will seek to achieve these policy and activities. And within this report, each of the 13 TMPs set out the principle for each TMP and the schedule for how the authority applies its practices. It's quite a weighty document, so really opening it up to any questions that you might have on how any of the specific practices that we've highlighted.
Thank you. The first question I have is regard to the prudential indicators. Has there been any change in the guidelines and how they're assessed?
They have given some recommended additional indicators, and we'll be reviewing that as part of our reports that we produce to the Audit and Governance Committee over 23 and 24 to be aligned to those new indicators.
Thank you. And the second question is your opening gambit about the banking crisis in America. I mean, certainly Silicon Valley Bank has probably presented the second worst banking catastrophe that the US has ever seen. So it's reassuring to note that we are on call here and exercising some degree of caution with regard to the investments. I'll now open it to the floor. Do we have any further questions? Councillor Wheeler.
Yes, thanks, Chair. On page 58, we've got the carbon footprint environmental implications, and I think that's a bit limited, as it's stated there. It reflects borrowing to support the provision of climate fund. What attention do we give to the ethical characteristics of the organisations we borrow from or invest in, please? It's fine us in ensuring that what we do ourselves is environmentally friendly, but if we're investing in an organisation that's burning down Amazon rainforest, and so it's a bit extreme, but are we doing any? I mean, what I'm really asking about is, are we doing anything to investigate the ethical characteristics of the organisations we're involved with, please?
It's a very good question. I mean, certainly, I know when it comes to pension investment, the sort of ethical side of it and environmental side is taken into account. No doubt you would like to answer that question for Councillor Wheeler.
Yes, again, through our treasury management advisors, they give us guidance on organisations, the banks that we do business with, and so we have got some things in place already through them of the companies. We haven't got direct drilling to how the specific funds, but we're reliant on the managers within those organisations.
Supplemental.
Yeah, I'm aware that I'm springing this on our officers without too much notice, and that's a bit unfair. I think it's something we ought to look into. I don't know how to propose exactly what we do, but I think Councillor Lowry might be about to help me.
Councillor Lowry.
Yes, we have in some considerable detail. You'll be aware that there's a Treasury Management Working Forum made up of 4 councillors who sit down and look at the issues advised to us by Treasury Management and by officers. But some time ago, we had a very detailed presentation and understanding of the impact of climate change and the decisions we make around our investments to address some of the concerns that you're referring to. And it is, as you can imagine, incredibly complex. But yes, there is a system in place. That system has been further developed by the marketplace to make sure that when we do make decisions to invest in Barclays, say, it might be a green bank one day, but they subsequently go and invest in the Amazon, something that's detrimental to the Amazon. How do you track that through, for instance, when they lend money to somebody else? So it does become immensely complex. But we do have a policy in place. And what I was going to suggest, Chair, is that working group that currently exists meets at their earliest opportunity to get an update on just not only the implications and the understanding of the banking crisis, but the issue that Councillor Wheeler's also raised.
I think that's a very sensible recommendation. So we will look to implement that because the group has met recently, and I'm not sure when the next meeting is scheduled, but certainly we will put that on the agenda for that. Thank you very much.
Chair, just a quick supplementary, just to note of interest, possibly Councillor Wheeler, that the bank that we use for our daily transactions is Barclays Bank, and they've gone very public on their intention to be zero by 2030, and they've issued there's lots on their website that we do keep an eye on just to keep that with them. But there are other banks out there that don't have such openness, so it's reassuring to know that we are with a green bank, if that helps.
Councillor Lowry.
I think in future updates of this report, we should reflect the climate change emergency, and there should be a paragraph in there that we can point to that explains what the council is doing in respect of its climate change emergency, in respect of its investments and its loans and so on and so forth.
Again, that's something which the pension investment people do for looking after the council's pension. So yes, that would make good sense as well. Any further questions or comments on this item of the agenda, please? In which case, we're very grateful for that report, and this committee duly notes it. Moving on to item number 14 on the agenda is the review of council officers' code of conduct, which is pages 111 to 132. And I believe we have our monitoring officer who's going to present this report.
Through you, Chair, it's I'll make the introduction if that's okay. But could I just take us back to the whistleblowing policy? You noted that report. My assumption is that's noted and approved as per the recommendations on the covering report.
I do apologise. We should rewind a bit. I believe we did note and approve the report. I mean, I certainly would like the point I made about track changes on there to see when we have amendment, how the report looked before and how it should look afterwards.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to make that clear. Thank you, Chair. Officers' Code of Conduct. This report and the Code of Conduct is in front of you today following a request at a previous Audit and Governance Committee to review the Officers' Code of Conduct. So we've appended it to the agenda for your consideration. The Officer Code of Conduct has been part of the current constitution since it was reformatted in 2012, and as it was before my time, I am aware that it was in place before the 2012 change to the constitution. There is no statutory requirement for an officer's code of conduct to be included in our constitution. Government has twice looked at making that a statutory requirement, but so far refrained from doing so. The code of conduct in front of you, I've compared that to our neighbours and unitary comparator authorities. It's broadly in line. Some words have changed here and there, but broadly they are similar and in line with an officer's code of conduct that was launched back in 1994. As I said, it's appended to the agenda for your consideration, but happy to take any questions, comments or suggested amendments, or indeed a resolution for further work if required. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Perry.
Just also a brief update. Members of the committee might be a little surprised to see 1994 as a date, but interestingly, the Local Government Association, whose predecessor body agreed the format for this, has not actually amended it since that time. Because if they had, the council would have, as it has done with the Model Code of Conduct for councillors, would have taken heed of updates of its membership bodies' core codes of conduct. And also it's probably worth members bearing in mind that the policies and standards that reinforce and cause the implementation of the code of conduct, such as the council's disciplinary and grievance policies, and of course the whistleblowing policy that you've considered earlier in this meeting, actually form, if you like, the operational and enacting documents that underpin the code of conduct document. But currently, as a local government industry, and obviously the Nolan principles being as current now as they were when this was first adopted, there is no local government association agreed update to what you see before you today.
Thank you. So all we have obviously statutory changes such as POCA, which I'll see in front of us, various other bits, but the rest of it is, on a piecemeal sort of basis. Would the monitoring officer like to comment? You've got a bit more to add to this, or shall we open it up for general questions, comment?
All I would say, Chair, is that the Code of Conduct is quite standard, given that most local authorities have based it on the LGA model. We are dealing with other connected policies. So, for example, we're looking at gifts and hospitality at the moment in relation to staff and declarations of conflict of interest, which will be supplemental to the Officer Code of Conduct as well. So they are in development.
Thank you. Questions, comments, observations? Councillor Stevens.
If you say you're glad I came again, I definitely won't believe you this time, Chair. Obviously, substituting at very short notice, so if I ask any daft questions that you've spoken about before as a committee, please come in and stop me. I want to look at two aspects that touch on our role as councillors. A lot of this will be matters for employees and their management chain, which I think good practice says that we stay out of as much as we can. That's why we have managers and management chains. I wanted to just look at political neutrality for a second, which there's a summary of in section 10 there. There's nothing wrong with that, but I just wanted to reflect on the fact that politics is a lot more than saying I vote Conservative, I vote Labour, or I vote Green, or one of those parties is best. So are we satisfied that we cover politics as a series of issues as well as a series of political parties? If you know what I mean there, Chair. That's my first point. And then the second one was about relationships. And again, I totally understand relationships between different officers, but occasionally you do have there are relationships developed of all different sorts between councillors and officers. So are we satisfied that what we've got reflects robustness for procedures as well as flexibility for people in their private lives?
Thank you. Could I pass that question to the monitoring officer unless Mr. Perrott wants to comment? Look poised to speak.
I know better than to interrupt the monitoring officer, Chair, but I'm happy to make a contribution at the appropriate time.
Sorry, I wasn't quite sure if you were coming in then, Giles, or not. Sorry. In terms of the political neutrality, obviously there are certain posts within the organisation that are politically restricted in law, and therefore there are specific requirements on what those posts can and cannot do. Generally, however, beyond that, there are no restrictions on officers. Therefore, it's drafted in a way that I do think achieves the balance of making sure that officers are sensible about how they approach their work, where they're not politically restricted, whilst recognising that there aren't those restrictions on officers in law other than in certain cases. In relation to the relationships point, partly this will be picked up as part of the work that we're doing on conflict of interest, because obviously your relationship with a counsellor, for example, could be a conflict of interest. So there will be some more guidance in terms of what needs to be declared and on what basis. But again, there isn't an absolute bar in this area, therefore it's sort of offering that guidance and expectation whilst trying not to set down hard and fast rules that aren't otherwise imposed. So I'm content with it. It will be built upon, and hopefully that will give greater clarity to officers in terms of what they need to declare.
Thank you. So we can take assurance that there's going to be further work on the conflicts of interest point. Does that allay your fears, Councillor Stevens, or would you like to comment?
Yeah, in terms of the relationship side, I mean, what Emma said makes perfect sense there. My point about the politics and neutrality, it wasn't a hierarchical one. I know that that there are different restrictions that apply at different parts of the hierarchy. That's always been the case, and there are very good reasons for that. My point was just to say that expressing political views does go a lot further than saying I vote Labour or I vote Conservative or I don't vote Labour or I don't vote Conservative. Politics is a series of issues as well as a series of political parties and candidates. So so long as Emma can say we get that and we bear it in mind, then I'd be satisfied.
Thank you, Mr. Perrott.
I think Councillor Stevens also, it's a point well made, and I think it's worth us all being aware of the fact that unlike some councils which retain one party in political control for significant periods of time, where there is always the danger that officers who've served for a large part of their career under one political administration might almost, without noticing it, find themselves serving that political. That is a situation that certainly in my period at Plymouth City Council has never been the case, and I hope that the exercise that our officers have in serving different political administrations of different political hues gives us a lot of practice in flexibility in that regard and not becoming culturally inured to one political party. And also, there in a ambitious city, there are a number of significant policy initiatives that that I think go to the point that Councillor Stevens was making. It's not just about party politics; it's also about specific issues. And I hope that the committee and all members, in fact, are aware of that. If at any point issues should emerge where they feel that balance isn't being held by officers, that we'll take a really proactive view about how to resolve those issues as they come up. I mean, I think we have a passionate cohort of councillors and we have a fairly passionate cohort of officers as well, which is good. And as I say, we don't have the experience of a single party being in control for such a long time that officers are not aware of what it's like to serve other parties. And really on the relationships front, I think that the point made is also a good one, that it is for the council to have the appropriate arrangements ready to put in place to protect both members and officers in all eventualities, as opposed to necessarily curtail any. Yes, exactly. In those circumstances, and I think certainly I have experience of the council taking those actions really to keep people safe in situations where issues of relationships come up. So I think this is a dynamic field that we work in, and certainly there's a lot of advice, guidance and support, I think, for both members and officers around how to operate in that political environment. We're particularly keen as well that it's not seen as a seniority thing, and that in fact we'd fully encourage more junior officers to engage in the process of working directly with members and try and avoid that hierarchical issue wherever we can. But that does involve making sure that officers are aware of the fundamental differences between the roles.
That's really helpful, Chair. The really bad news is that Giles has prompted another question. That's that, and I hate. Oh, there's no other way to break it to you. I'll just come out with it. Given what Giles said, which I think is very positive in terms of it's not just people at the top of the officer hierarchy that are encouraged to work with councillors. That's a general thing. I think what needs to go hand in hand with that is proper political awareness training for our staff in general, and that's not something for this policy, but certainly the officers we've got here are used to us and the world we live in. They know the personalities. Again, all joking aside, they know how far to go with politics, how far not to. There's no issue, basically. But there are lots of our staff who may only interact with a councillor on a serious issue once in their entire working life, but who still need the awareness that our colleagues here do. So if we can take that away to whichever forum is most appropriate, if I can ask Ross and Giles to perhaps do that later. I don't think it needs a formal minute or anything, but just if that can be bear in mind, I think that's essential. You do occasionally, I'm sure the four of us will occasionally have had a course to deal with officers who clearly aren't used to dealing with councillors, and it's really frustrating, and that can easily be avoided by the sort of training that our colleagues here clearly don't need.
Yes, I'm sure Mr. Perrett's political impartiality and professionalism is beyond reproach. Is there any further questions on this particular policy? Yes, Chair. In which case the committee, of course, note the current Officer Code of Conduct as published within its constitution, and we accept that there is a wider review of the constitution is underway, and further reports will be provided in due course. Moving on, therefore, if there's no further points on this one, to item number 15 of the agenda, which is the review of arrangements for dealing with complaints through the Code of Conduct. Sorry, I've just jumped that bit. Do beg your pardon. Moving on, sorry. It's the arrangements, right. Number 15, yeah, sorry. Do beg your pardon. No. Yeah, sorry, yeah.
Oh, right, yours is.
Yeah, I was right. There we go. Do beg your pardon. Sorry, yes, it's the review of arrangements for dealing with complaints through the Code of Conduct. And I believe that's the monitoring officer again.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I apologise, the briefing report that was supposed to accompany it hasn't been included, so I will talk you through what should have been there in front of you in writing. As you will know, we adopted a new Code of Conduct based on the LJ Model Code of Conduct back in March 2022. And at that time, it was explained to members that arrangements would follow in terms of updating how we deal with standards complaints. Therefore, since I've been in post, I've been looking at different types of arrangements, and I've now produced the first draft of proposed new arrangements for the council in terms of dealing with standards complaints. Just so you're clear, what's in front of you isn't an amended document, it's actually completely from scratch. So there's no track changes because obviously it's not based on the original the current standards arrangements that we have in place. So just to remind members of the legal position, we're required to have, under the Localism Act, arrangements in place for dealing with councillor complaints. The legislation gives some detail in there as regards to what it must include, but generally otherwise it's left to the discretion of each council to determine how it will deal with standards complaints. One of the mandatory requirements is that any complaint must be in writing and must be considered in line with the arrangements. Therefore, there's a clear obligation within the current draft that complaints are in writing. Another one is that at the point of investigation, once an investigation has been conducted, then the views of an independent person must be sought. Otherwise, there's generally discretion in terms of how a complaint is dealt with and when the independent person comes into play. I've just also want to flag that there's been a recent finding of the Social Care and Local Government Ombudsman in relation to the process for dealing with standards complaints. The Ombudsman doesn't ordinarily get involved in standards complaints, but chose to review a particular complaint that was referred to it. And in the conclusion of the Ombudsman, they confirmed that every local authority should have in place clear arrangements, that an investigation against a councillor in terms of its conduct cannot be instigated by the monitoring officer unless there's a written complaint on the matter submitted to it in line with the arrangements, and that standard complaints must make clear what the allegations have been made and why, in relation and in reference to the code of conduct, so that it can be made clear to the subject councillor what the allegations are against them. In terms of Plymouth City Council, just to provide some context, there's been a consistent year-on-year rise in complaints since 2020. Therefore, in 2017 to 2020, we had at the lowest 3 complaints and at the highest 11. However, since then, we've seen an increase. In 2021, we had 29 complaints. In 2022, we had 53 complaints, and at the time of writing the draft report, I'd had 29 year to date from the start of January this year. So we are seeing an increase in complaints, and there is a need for some clarity on the procedure for people, because there are some areas within our arrangements where it's not precisely clear what will happen. Also, the volume of current complaints has led to a bottleneck in terms of dealing with them. And what we don't have in the current arrangements is a clear multi-stage approach, or making it clear when an investigation commences as opposed to a fact find. So that creates some difficulty in how complaints are approached. Under the Act, there's no requirement for a formal investigation to be undertaken. If a decision can be taken without a formal investigation, it can be made. That's been worked into the arrangements before you as well. However, that's on the basis that it could be clearer where a formal investigation is required, isn't required, and what might happen if one isn't undertaken. Also, in the draft before you, the role of the independent person is more clearly set out. It specifies when they must be consulted and when they may be consulted, and gives a little bit more clarity on their role in relation to standards complaints. Other changes that are in the draft before you, which are proposed, is a decision by committee, a stage where a complaint might come before a standards committee, which would be replacing the standards advisory group. What it proposes is that complaints will be referred to the committee where the monitoring officer considers it's necessary in line with the arrangements. The committee then would consider the questions of whether there has been a breach and/or what sanctions are to apply in the event that a breach has been found. It also as I referred to earlier in terms of the multi-stage, it also introduces what I'm calling a fact find. So it's distinguishing between a formal investigation and a fact find where the monitoring officer will try to establish what's happened before determining how to deal with a complaint. A formal investigation can go much further. It understands the impact, collects a lot of information, and speaks to different people involved, whereas a fact finder will generally be more limited. This is to ensure that it's very clear whether a member is subject to an investigation or whether it's simply that I need to, or whoever's investigating it needs to find more information on the matter. And finally, there's more information in there in terms of what might be considered in terms of informal resolution. This can be used at any point in the process, and that's made clear so that even if a matter were proceeding through an investigation, it could be that informal resolution is then agreed and the matter then is dealt with by way of informal resolution. Thank you, Chair. I'll take any questions.
Well, the first is an observation. If you've got those many complaints, I don't know how you find time to do legal work, but congratulations on that, grappling with that. I must admit, one thing, I'm trying to find it in the report, but you mentioned when you gave the summary that you as monitoring officer would have the capacity to refer something to the committee for investigation. I mean, surely that's quite... Section 10.1. That's quite subjective, and I'm personally concerned in terms of process that one individual is virtually making that call without referral to anybody else. But I will open that up as a wider comment, and I would also like to link this to perhaps constitutional reform and review, which I have a couple of items to bring up under this heading. But first, can we perhaps deal with the matter in hand? Yes, Councillor Stevens.
Thanks, Chair. Hopefully an easy one first. 11.1, the list of sanctions, is that a statutory list, or is that something subjective that we have either devised or, I'm going to choose my language, nicked from somewhere else?
It's not a statutory list. It's taken from what we currently have in our arrangements and also other ones that are quite commonly used and referred to in the LGA guidance, for example. So there aren't any statutory sanctions. However, there is, I suppose, best practice and guidance in terms of what a monitoring officer might consider.
Okay, I understand that. Number 4, the independent person, and this links to, and I should have made a note. Yeah, 12.3, which is you including a summary of their views when you publish your decision. I presume that's in either direction. If the complaint is upheld or rejected, the independent person's input would still be a matter of record. I just want to be clear, because this is the bit that gives me concern, because I've been through not this process, but one of its predecessor processes, when the independent person chaired what we used to call a standards committee in the olden days, as my son says, and that's fine. I had certainly no complaints about the officers or their work, but I was found against. And the next time I saw the independent person, he was wearing a rosette of an opposing party standing for election, which I'll leave you to speculate on how independent I think he now was at the time. So what do we... Now, clearly, if someone leaves this post, the idea that Emma would have any political restrictions over a member of the public is absolutely ludicrous. But what do we do to alleviate that? What can we do to stop that happening in the future? Because we've just discussed the relationship between members and officers, and I think we had quite a very useful discussion there. We know the responsibilities that there are on us as councillors. We know the responsibilities that officers have in this sort of... It's when you get this sort of independent... I'm not a councillor, so I'm not subject to election. I'm not an employee of the council, so I'm not part of that management chain with all the controls there. I feel very uneasy when we get these sort of third-party people into our formal processes and how we manage that. So that's where I am at the moment. But I think it's obviously something that we need to have in some form. But going on what you were hinting at, Chair, if this can form part of the wider review, I think that would be a useful process.
Thank you. ask the monitoring officer to answer the question, and then I've got a question as well of the same ilk, and then I'll bring it on to my conclusion as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So as a matter of, yes, the independent person's opinion will always be a matter of record for the complaint. In the arrangements, you will see that it's only intended to publish those complaints where the member is found in breach. The primary reason for this is the public won't necessarily know that a complaint has been made against a member, and therefore it's general practice that where a member has a complaint made against them and they are not found to be in breach, that unless there are specific circumstances, it won't be published, because by releasing it in itself, where there's not been published before, it could further cause damage. So it's to try and achieve that balance for members in terms of protecting their reputation where a complaint isn't upheld. In relation to the independent person, it's a statutory requirement. There are restrictions on the post in terms of their employment and them not being a member of a political group. That is reflected in the terms and conditions that they will sign up to, and has been reflected in the, for want of a better word, service specification for an independent person. There is a report coming to council on the 27th, and in terms of the two persons who are proposed, I can confirm that both are politically independent. Both are currently independent persons for other local authorities, and therefore are established in terms of their practice and their experience. And we will be putting those restrictions on their appointment in terms of remaining politically neutral, etc. But we are required to have one in terms of the law. So we've got the safeguards there, but obviously we can't control what somebody might do after the event.
Thank you.
Could I come back on the first issue then, which was the, well, I say first, I mixed around, didn't I? The independent person's views and their release or non-release. From what Emma was saying, and feel free to chip in, Emma, if I get this wrong, the complaint process would only become public, for want of a better phrase, if there's a finding against the councillor. And Emma's nodding at that, so I'm taking that as to... So someone says, I think Councillor Stevens has done X, Y and Z, isn't he awful? Emma does an investigation. If you find nothing, then that would never see the light of day publicly. If, however, there is something there that you find and there is an appropriate sanction, that's when it becomes public. There is a third category, which is when, and if this is barred, tell me, but when a complaint comes in and the complainor then tells the world they've put a complaint in against Councillor so-and-so, because they're awful and I'm getting onto the Herald and Councillor so-and-so's ridiculous and of course this complaint's going to be upheld and all the rest of it. I think natural justice would demand then that if there is a fine, and I'm going to use legal language because I don't know anything, if there's an acquittal, then I think the councillor is entitled to have the reasons for their acquittal made public, because under the no smoke without fire principle, it's been in the media, all the allegations have been rehearsed, yet the councillor can't say, actually I'm innocent, because the independent person says so. I think fairness demands that that flexibility is built in as well.
So through you, Chair, the arrangements are drafted in that way so that I'm not compelled to publish a complaint where there has been a finding of no fault against the member. But obviously, if it were a matter of public record, it had been discussed, or the member themselves proactively wanted it publishing, then it's not a bar to that. It's more giving the ability for it to be looked at on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you. I have an issue with 10.13 on page 130. It reads that the monitoring officer may refer the matter to the standards committee, where they consider the matter as one or more of the following: very serious, conflict of interest has arisen, matters particularly complex, etc., etc. Again, it's back to my opening gambit on this. It places, I know that you with a great deal of integrity, and you're an officer of the court as well as the officer of this council. But it places a great deal of responsibility on an individual to make that referral and that call. I believe that perhaps these regulations need to be tightened down a bit, where such a decision could be called in and somebody else can make the referral to the standards committee, not just the monitoring officer, judge and jury and executioner in his or her own court.
If I may, Chair, these go further and give me less responsibility than the current arrangements, whereby committee isn't a decision maker at all. There's only the Standards Advisory Group which expresses its views to me. The reason it's been done in this way is because there does need to be a degree of control, in the sense that you can imagine the situation where, if it were opened up any more widely, a complainant may want it to go to a committee, but it may not be appropriate for some reason because it might be trivial, or likewise in terms of the subject member. Some authorities have all their complaints where they're likely to be found in breach or recommended for breach go to committee. The other difficulty with that is, as I say, 29 complaints to date, 59 last year, with the number still outstanding. The committee has the potential to be meeting quite frequently and have quite a heavy workload. And then there is also the fact that the committee itself would be politically proportionate, and therefore referring matters to the committee itself does mean you're referring it to a committee, whereby if the member were of the political group in overall control, it would be tried by members of its own group as the majority on the committee, and that in itself tends to lead to concerns on the part of members who aren't perhaps in the party with overall control.
Councillor Stevens.
Yeah, just on that paragraph you raised, 10.13, I find number 2 there quite a prejudicial statement. All the others, you can have a very serious allegation made against you, Chair, and be totally innocent. You can have a politically sensitive allegation against you, but be totally innocent. I think number 2 should say a conflict, an allegation of a conflict may have arisen. And a conflict of interest having arisen almost says you've done something bad, and if we can say that, I think we all know where we're going with this one, but if we can perhaps change the language to say there's either been an allegation of a conflict of interest or a conflict of interest may have arisen. And then on the point you were just discussing with the monitoring officer, is there anything we can do informally to try to get this number of complaints down? Because for me, it devalues the whole system. I can remember, and I've said this at several presentations, I can remember when the 2000 Act brought in the whole standards regime, and it was about hands in the till, bribery, corruption, favours for your mate, etc. All of which the public have grave concerns about. It's now morphed into, well, George looked at me the wrong way, George was rude to me. And that devalues the whole thing. So if there's any informal, to begin with, work that can be done to move us down that road so that this is reserved for the really serious stuff that the public would want it to focus on, then I think that'd be a good thing.
So what you're suggesting actually, Councillor Stevens, is some sort of screening process where the trivial matters are taken out of the system before it gets to that sort of level.
Well, what I would be interested in, given Emma's figures, how many do we have, if you don't have it off the top of your head, because I'm asking you a completely unrehearsed question, Emma, don't worry. Do we have any idea of how many complaints come internally versus, so councillor versus councillor compared to member of the public versus councillor? Because my suspicion, and it could be completely wrong, as a lot of my suspicions are, is that a lot of the work Emma's talking about is councillor, I don't like George, he was rude to me in the corridor, or whatever it is. It's that bit that I think we need to really, really lessen in order to make sure, as I say, we focused on the real robust and juicy stuff.
I totally agree. Do we have any statistics to answer that question?
Yes, so first of all, if I can just clarify, 10.13 2, conflict of interest has arisen, that's in relation to myself. So if there were a conflict of interest on my part that meant it wasn't appropriate for me to determine a complaint,
That's fine.
it would
Thank
be
you.
referred to
That's
committee.
really
So I'll have that amended so that it's absolutely clear. In relation to statistics, I looked at it probably about 4 months ago. At that point, it was looking more or less 50-50 between members of the public and councillor on councillor complaints. What I would say, though, is that some of the member of the public complaints are people who are affiliated perhaps with members within the council in some way, shape or form. So it's very difficult to give an accurate picture, but there are certainly it's certainly at least a 50-50% split as of 4 months ago, but I haven't reviewed it more recently.
Excellent, thank you for that. What I would like to propose now, again, it's slightly controversial in many respects, but I think this is an appropriate point to raise it to get the committee's appetite. Constitutional review is something which has been expressed to me as Chairman of Audit and Governance over a number of levels. And of course, this policy is intrinsically linked to the Constitution as well. For example, we have a referral from the Scrutiny Committee to look at to work in conjunction with the monitoring officer to review via subgroup the way this council deals with petitions brought to the council and how the Constitution interacts with that, and to see whether there's any lessons to learn from that process, as we've recently had a petition, which is probably one of the first we've had for a good number of years. And also to consider the overall review of the Constitution generally regarding engagement, approach to processes, and everything linked to the petitions, so that they're clearly defined and understood. Now, perhaps this is the time now when we look at the Constitution, there's still references to European points which after Brexit probably may not be relevant. Should we be embracing a wholehearted full review of the Constitution for a working group which would deal with not only the points that Councillor Stevens raised, the points which scrutiny raised, and the points generally that people have raised? Mr. Jago.
Through you, Chair, there is provision in your terms of reference to establish a subcommittee to do just that. It might be sensible to consider waiting to re-establish that group, its membership and its terms of reference following the local elections in May.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, certainly. Mr. Perrott.
And I'm looking at the monitoring officer while I say this as well. There's a judgment call for the committee, I think, about whether it refers. I completely am in the hands of the committee about the further work that's clearly been requested in terms of the Constitution. So I haven't got a problem with that at all. Understanding it in respect of the arrangements for dealing with complaints. A judgment call for the committee would be whether it adopts these arrangements and refers them for further work, because if it didn't do that, you'd be stuck with the existing arrangements as they are in the Constitution, which fall very far short of both what you've both the spirit and the letter of what members, I think, for some months have been hoping to see reflected. I don't think it's particularly unusual, because I think these things are always sensible to keep under review and to have further input into. But I think a judgment for the committee is, would it be better to consult on amending what you see before you today, rather than arrangements that have been untouched since 2012 and in fact don't even suit the new model code of conduct for officers that was agreed just a year ago by the council. So I think it in no way undermines what you've proposed, Chair, but I think the committee should bear in mind it might be good to do this in stages, and stage one of which would be to adopt what's before you today and refer it to the working group for with the amendments that you've already agreed, certainly the clarifications, and then refer that to the working group of this committee.
So, certainly I would advocate dealing it with two limbs, the wider constitutional review and the matter in hand, which is this report. I mean, I still have some reservations with this, and I personally would like to review it in more detail, but I'm open to the general view and guidance from this committee. Does anyone else have any? Vice Chair?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm of the opinion that we should approve this document before us now, and it forms part of next calendar's municipal year's workload to look at the constitution in its entirety. It's my understanding that there's a need for us to do that regardless of circumstances anyhow. And when members are undertaking that review along with officers, this item can once again be sense checked to ensure everybody is entirely happy with it. So I would like for us to approve this documentation and therefore make a note in our tracking resolutions that in the next municipal year, the new Audit and Governance Committee set up a subgroup to look at the Constitution and specifically, if you wish, Chair, this issue to give you some comfort.
Thank you. Yes, and I would labour the latter point, this issue.
Could we, what I'm worried about is the bureaucracy. There's nothing in what Mark said that doesn't make sense and shouldn't happen. But what I'm worried about is us getting to the AGM, which is at the end of May, and you know we elect the Lord Mayor, and that's all very jolly, and we also populate this committee with whoever's there, and then we wait for the first meeting of this committee to say, shall we establish a subgroup, and then can we make sure that even if the subgroup doesn't actually do anything before polling day, that it's there ready to be populated by whoever wins the election, whoever turns out to be on the majority group, minority groups, whatever, rather than say, we'll do something, we'll have a committee on dynamic decision making that's going to meet in 5 months' time, which is what normally happens in local government.
That is a very sensible suggestion. And it's possible, Mr. Jago?
Yes, through you, Chair. We've already provisioned in your terms of reference for that group. So my suggestion regarding post May election was just the membership of the council will be different, and you may well have a different set of members on that group. So it's already established in your terms of reference, and you can point to it at that point.
So when you ask for, I mean, the cabinet is slightly different. When you say to the groups, who do you want on the scrutiny committees this year? Who do you want on the licensing committee? Who do you want on the planning committee? This subgroup will form part of that information request as well.
So it's a subcommittee for this committee. Yeah. So it's a decision of this committee.
It is what it
is. Is there any further questions or comments on this?
You might get a job out.
So, in summary, we do approve this subject to the recommendations that we've made. Thank you very much indeed. I'm sorry that was a long point, but it was a very valid point we had to discuss and deliberate. Moving on, therefore, to item number 16 of the agenda, which is a slightly lighter subject. Mr. Jago, your topic, risk.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure it's lighter. Thank you, Chair. So regular reports to the committee. The strategic risk register has been updated. The number of strategic risks currently being managed is 22. 6 risks currently have a rating of red, and these relate to expenditure, complexity of demand in children and young people, IT, supply chain constraints, cyber attacks, lack of adult social care workforce, accounting methods concerning a pension transaction, and a new risk concerning sustainable drainage systems approval body, which may well need to be set up in 2024. Risk number 17 concerning housing has had its risk score decreased to 9 and is now shown as green. And the risk to vulnerable children and young people in the care system, which was risk number 6, it's been reported as green as the last 2 reviews, and through discussion with the directorate is now considered sufficiently mitigated. It's been moved to the operational register, so it will continue to be reviewed, but it's not on the strategic risk register. Just a quick note concerning risk at scrutiny. As you'll be aware, this committee has suggested in the past that scrutiny review our strategic risks, which they have been doing over the course of the municipal year. Risk reporting was also part, I think maybe for the first time, part of the budget papers when considering the 2023-24 budget. Chair, the recommendation is to note the current position and happy to take any questions. I'll answer them best I can.
May I ask a very silly question? The sort of question you might expect from me, Mr. Jago. Looking at the red category, we have the cyber attack risk. Now, I know the council's expended money on the review, the Cyber 360, and measures are put in place to try and offset this. Is there any prospect that this would actually drop down to a lower category, or are we still really on red alert when it comes to cyber risk?
So I can't profess to be an expert, Chair, but I would say that absolutely cyber, that risk of cyber attack, it remains very high and is addressed as such locally within the council. I think the review is going to report in April. I think we'll have a better view then. It's certainly been part of the scrutinies work programme over the, I think it's been on there. I think they've reviewed it once. I'd expect that they'd undertake a further consideration of the review when it reports in April.
Thank you. It's a report in April. Yes, Mr. Perry.
Just briefly, Chair, obviously this is a pretty important issue for us all to consider. We have, one of the things that's informed our approach to this from a business continuity perspective is talking to those councils who have already been the subject of a cyber attack. And I think we're also aware more locally that City Bus in this city also was the subject of a cyber attack. And what's emerged really is twofold in a way. Is number one, there is absolutely no 100% surefire guarantee to prevent a successful cyber attack on any large organisation, because it just takes one person to open a link or a new type of incursion that we're not aware of yet. So the learning from other local authorities and other large organisations is that that from a business continuity perspective, the organisation has to have a way of delivering its critical activities with no IT in order to, where those activities are of a life and limb nature, as well as developing its response against cyber attack. So I think until the council's been able to confirm that it's got business continuity arrangements in place for all its critical services that actually don't rely on IT, we would recommend, I think, this risk remaining classified as it is. And that's really based on our experience of those councils that have been unfortunate enough to have been through this and have taken, have taken months to recover from that situation, and in fact are still not fully recovered, even as we speak. So I think Mr. Dossett is still with us on the call, and I imagine his experience of other clients of Grant Thornton that short of being able to operate with alternative systems to IT systems, there's no other way of completely proofing an organisation against cyber attackers as things currently stand.
Thank you both for the clarity on that. Any questions or observations on the risk register, Councillor Lowry?
As has been said, this is an incredibly important document, and I'm pleased that this committee has taken a considerable amount of time and effort to ensure that we fully understand some of the risks and question them, but equally a new thing we've introduced, which is, as Mr. Jacobs referred to, referring it to the relevant scrutiny panels and of course the budget on this occasion, which I think is a step forward on behalf of this council, and we should welcome that. I note there are a number of new risks that have been added, some of which seem incredibly complex. The SUDS approval body, for instance, Schedule 3. I'm just slightly conscious that the municipal year is moving on, and it will be imperative for a considerable period of time, and elections and AGMs and so on and so forth, before the new committees get to meet. So I just once again, I keep asking for it, but some assurances that in the absence of all us hard-working councillors, as the new terminology is, these issues are being addressed, please.
The assurance point is a good one. Can we take assurance?
Yes, you can, Chair. As per the risk management strategy, there's ongoing review of both the strategic risk register and the operational risk register, which is reported both to the corporate management team and departmental management teams, and is discussed with the risk champions as set out in that risk management strategy.
Thank you. Councillor Wheeler.
Sorry, Chair. Can I look at number 19, viability of commercial bus operators? It's not a red risk, it's only yellow. But since our failed bid for the Bus Back Better programme, I think we were one of the 48 authorities that didn't get any funding. 35 others did get something, but not very much. The government has paid subsidy to keep commercial bus services going. This item addresses mainly the concession services, which we have control over. We don't have any control over the commercial services, but that's what I wanted to ask about, because since I think it was March 20 last year, the government's we come to the cliff edge, and the government gives 3 more months subsidy to the commercial operators. They've just done that again. They've just renewed subsidy until June of this year. But I just don't understand how the commercial bus companies are operating when they don't know what's going to happen at the end of the subsidy period. It's not our job, but can we invite the relevant scrutiny committee to discuss this with the operators and take forward in any way possible?
I mean, certainly this item on the agenda relates to risk, and it's been identified as a risk. As for referral to another committee for scrutiny, I will be deferring to the officers with their learned judgment.
Thank you, Chair, through you. This risk register would appear on every scrutiny committee's agenda. If it's something specific that should be included on a work programme, so agendaed for a meeting, then we can certainly make that approach and see if that can happen sooner rather than later. Councillor, obviously we've got a couple of months before those groups next meet, so if there's something we can provide you outside of the meeting, more than happy to look into that for you.
Do you want to make a formal recommendation?
Sorry, we're not going to be able to make any progress until whenever it is, and the subsidy might have ended by then. Who knows? We might have no buses by then.
Anything else on the risk management register? Thank you. In which case, the committee notes the report with grateful thanks. Working on tracking resolutions, item number 17 of the agenda, we have the list of the tracking resolutions at pages 133 to 136. Mr. Jacob.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully the tracking resolutions are self-explanatory, but just to bring to your attention the additional report that we've added on to the tracking resolution in response to minute 60 of the 16th of January. It refers to the task and finish group, which was charged with the design and implementation of the consultation on the electoral cycle, and there's a number of recommendations within that report for your approval today.
Excellent. Yes, I was involved in that consultation process. We now have a situation where the questions are devised. We are a clear understanding of where we're going. We are on time, bang on time with the recommendations. We conducted that review within the timeframe stipulated in our first report. Anybody would like to add to that item of tracking? I think the question is exactly as, Councillor Evans had some views on it. To my mind, from my recollection, Vice Chair, that was exactly the way we wanted the questions formatted. Is that correct?
That is correct, Chair, yes.
In which case, I think if committee's in approval, I think we can certainly approve that. You all in favour? Thank you. Right, I would also like to go to the last item of tracking, which is the point about the, sorry, bear with me, I'm just trying to find it on the computer.
DBSs?
No, it wasn't the DBS, it was the one about the elections and the safeguards that we're going to put in place. The previous meeting, Audit and Governance, Councillor Evans asked me to write to the Chief Executive to express some concern about the way the new electronic registration is going to take place. What I propose to do is put the copy of the Chief Exec's response onto the minutes to answer that particular point, if everyone's in agreement. And also I can add to it in terms of the number of VACs that have now been applied for. As of Monday the 13th of March, Glenda tells me there's 247 VAC applications, which is a marked improvement from when we started. Councillor Winner.
What's the number that we might have expected if everyone had applied and we used the Electoral Commission's basis?
Very good question. I don't know the answer to that. Anyone?
Well,
ideas?
that's because there isn't one. This came up when we were discussing the issue with prospective candidates and agents on Friday evening as well. Based on two studies undertaken by the Cabinet Office on a national basis, so we need to bear that in mind. Somewhere between 4 and 6% of the population have been estimated to not have valid photographic ID. Translating that figure from a national basis on a sample to Plymouth would equate to between 6,000 and 8,000 people. But as I say, I'm doing something with the data there. Secondly, the deadlines, obviously, for and even that's a little bit complex because there's a deadline for registration, a deadline for applying for a voter authorisation certificate, but thereafter, in the event of a voter authorisation certificate not turning up, there's scope for the issue of a temporary voter authorisation certificate. And in the event of a voter losing or being deprived of their photographic ID, there is also scope for an emergency voter authorisation certificate to be issued. So a range of different things going on there. The other thing we updated prospective candidates and agents on last week is and hopefully committee members will be aware of a pretty substantial campaign now, both national and local, being undertaken with targeted advertising within the city to areas where our census data show us there are less likely to be, for example, ownership of a driving licence or a passport. So we're focused, paid for advertising on social media, hoardings, billboards, etc., to focus people. And the last bit, you can imagine this is quite high on my personal list of priorities. I could probably talk about this for the rest of the afternoon, Councillor Wheeler. We're also proposing for the first time, given us more information to include on the polling card this year, including all the forms of photographic ID. We have made the returning officer has made the decision on advice to actually have the polling card in an envelope rather than on its own, which does actually give us scope for a reminder to feature very prominently about photographic ID on every single polling card envelope. So we really are doing absolutely everything we possibly can to maximise people's opportunities to know in advance that they'll need to consider this issue, and then also to support people in the event they need voter authorisation certificates. I think the issue is we're going to have to get quite a long way into the profile of the election, for example, notice of election being published next week, for it to, I think, start registering on people's radar as something of concern, because people tend to start to apply themselves to that issue a little bit further along. So we've got a lot further consciousness raising and profile raising to do. So obviously those figures that you've heard are very low compared with a national estimate on what might be needed within the city, but we're fully expecting them to exponentially increase over the coming weeks. And if you can think of anything else that we might do to support this process, we'd be only too pleased to hear from you. But hopefully we're trying to cover absolutely all elements of this.
Thank you. I mean, clearly a lot of water has gone under the bridge since Councillor Evans first raised this point at this committee, and I think we can take assurance from the fact that the council are doing all that's possible to bring this to the forefront. Any questions on that point, or anything else on tracking? So I think we approved the tracking, and thank you for producing that comprehensive report. Item number 18 on the agenda, therefore, is the work programme. For members to discuss the programme and then finally note the work. That's on pages 137 to 138 of your pack. It's nothing. Excellent. So therefore, I will conclude the meeting by thanking the officers and members for all the hard work over the last municipal year. It's been a pleasure dealing with all of you, and I thank all the people online and the good people of Plymouth watching. Audit and Governance is an important committee on the council. I think it's pretty underestimated. I mean, and that's why we are all here to a united effort, and I do thank you in earnest. Hopefully see you all soon, and I think we can close the meeting.
Should we thank you for your stewardship throughout the
year,
that's
too kind, Councillor Stevens. Thank you.
It was an open question.
Clearly didn't get a positive response, did it? Thank you all.
Thank you.
Close at 10 past 3. Thank you.